Hello and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild, and I'm super excited to be here on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. This is our first time recording back in studio, and I'm super excited to have with me here today Chyana Marie Sage. She's not only a friend, she's also an author, a journalist, a model, a poet, a storyteller, honestly does all the things. I forget your sign though. What's your sign?
Capricorn.
A Capricorn.
So that checks out.
That does check out.
Checks out.
She's from Edmonton, but she actually spent a lot of her time in New York. She was the first Indigenous graduate of Columbia University's MFA program in creative nonfiction, and her new book, Soft as Bones, has become an instant national bestseller. So I'm super excited to have you here on the podcast. If you just want to introduce yourself, your name, and your nation, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Tansei, Chyana Marie Sage, Nitsigasan, a Maskwacis Wiskayagan Ochinia. So I'm Chyana Marie Sage, but I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, but registered member for Louisville tribe. So that's kind of where I'm from.
Well, I love all the work that you do, but also I love how you remain rooted in who you are. I feel like whether you're writing or whether you're modeling or whether you're hosting an event, I feel like you stay grounded and rooted to who you are as an Indigenous person. And also your book is, it's a memoir of all that you've been through, but I'm curious of like where your story really started. I want to know a little bit more of like where you grew up and how you got to be at this point in your life, because we do see the success stories and we see the highlight reels, but I really want to know like where that all first began.
Oh, that's like the biggest question ever. Oh my God. So, well, my family moved around a lot. So I was actually born here on the West Coast in Surrey. And so my dad's side of the family is from here, and we kind of bounced around. We would go from BC, then we'd move to Alberta, and then we would move here, move back to Alberta. And eventually we settled down kind of in a little trailer outside of the city. And so I would say like those were like my formative years growing up. So it was very much rooted in nature. And I remember just like being outside all day long, like from the point that, right after breakfast until literally my mom was like screaming at me to get in the house. And just like, I don't know, thinking about that point of my life, it was like climbing trees and just like being free with my sisters and exploring the forests and finding salamanders and like catching frogs and just like all of that. And it was for me, what childhood like should have been like and what it should have remained. But, the reality is that like while me and my sisters were like outside and, playing and having fun and doing all this stuff is, my mom was inside the house with my dad, who, even though I didn't know it at the time, was like quite abusive. And there'd be like snippets and things that I would see, of course, like his anger was definitely something that ruled our household and dictated what we could and could not do. And I don't know if I wrote this in the book actually, but my sisters love to tell this one memory. So you talk about like who I am and being rooted in myself and carrying that everywhere. And if I think about me as a young girl, like I've always been a stickler for justice and like what's right. And so our dad would always not let us do things. And so me and my sisters, we wanted to go next door to our neighbor's house. There was another little girl that lived there to go play. And we knew that he was going to say no. But so I walked into the living room and there's my mom and my dad sitting there. And I go, Mom, like, can we go next door to go play with Shelby? And she goes to respond and my dad pipes up and he's like, no, you're not allowed. And I had planned that I was going to do this because I knew he was going to do it. And I looked at him in the eyes and I'm like 6 or 7. And I go, was I talking to you?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so that was like, I was so tired of like his tyranny. I like at that point, but I got dragged into the kitchen and the wooden spoon came out. But,
right.
So that was kind of like a little bit of that. And then when we moved into the city, I think I was like 10, it just kind of went to a downward spiral from there. Like my parents split up, and that's when my dad kind of got like heavily involved into the drug dealing world. And so living on the north side of Edmonton, you know, kind of like by like, we lived off 118th Street in a neighborhood called Westwood. And yeah, just kind of like lived around there for a while, and things kind of just got more and more tumultuous kind of as the years went on. And the abuse in my household ramped up, and just so many questions of like noticing that my father's relationship was like so much different with my older sister, and being a young girl and having so many questions about like, why does dad love Orlean more than me? And, you know, feeling these like comparisons and different things like that. But that's like one side of it. And so the other side of it is like, thankfully, like I've always been rooted in culture. And so talking back on like the acreage, like this was like a place where like our whole family would come there. So like aunts, uncles, cousins, like all of us, we'd have these big bonfires, and like kids would be running around, and like the parents would be getting drunk, and you know, just classic shit like that. Yep. But we would tell stories sitting around the fire, and that was like the big thing. So like, yes, you know, my father could be complicated and angry and have, you know, that side of him, but he was also like a really amazing storyteller, and like so funny and so charismatic. And so we would all sit around the fire, and, you know, my grandpa and my dad and all of my uncles would tell stories of like Wasaki chalk and like wheat to go. And,
sweet.
You know, we'd have to go into the forest to go pee, and they'd be like, make sure wheat to go doesn't come get you, and like things like that. And then also on the flip side of that is then I had like my grandmother in my life, whose trailer we lived in at the time. And she was such a powerful woman, powerful matriarch. And so she always took us to like women talking circles, and she, you know, brought me my first sweat lodge and everything like that. So definitely like there was chaos and violence, but there was also like the groundedness of culture and nature, like nature specifically, and being on the land. And I think that my relationship with the land has like been the thing that I have carried throughout all of it, even like the difficulties.
Sweet. It was like a pillar in your foundation of your life, and like to who you are today.
100%.
It's so wild because like when I've listened to your interviews and when I've read some of your book, I haven't read it all, if I'm being completely honest, because the reason is because your life draws a lot of parallels to my own. And so I feel like I'm sure your book also draws a lot of parallels to a lot of Indigenous people here within Canada or even globally. I think we all can understand, you know, intergenerational trauma, and we know that like through thick and thin. And so for me, though, specifically, because my dad and my mom met in prison as well.
Shut up. Oh my God. What the hell? I didn't even know.
So that's why I'm like trying to, it's almost like when you write about your life, I see mine literally reflected in those pages. And so for me, it's like, it's obviously easier to just like put that on the back burner and then just keep going. And so what I love about what you've done is you've gone to those darker parts of your own psyche and of your own life, and you've written about them in a way that's courageous yet like graceful. And I mean, you speak to that in the title, Soft as Bones. If you want to explain what Soft as Bones means in your own words, you can do that. But yeah, it's so weird because we literally have parallels so much within our own life. Like my dad was also a writer. So like I have the gift of storytelling through my dad. And so to listen to you just share that like your dad was also a storyteller, I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah. And he would write me poems, like, because he was in and out of jail throughout my childhood, like before the last time. But to this day, I have like the poems that he wrote to me, like from prison.
I literally have a stack of his letters from prison that he wrote my mom, my brother, me, and then I have like a stack of prison papers that I just like don't want to go through. That's from like the psychiatrists and the doctors and all the people that like helped him. But yeah, it's interesting how much parallels like our lives actually have.
Seriously.
Oh my gosh. For listeners that haven't read the book yet, could you explain the title, Soft as Bones, and also like I guess like the cliff notes of what the book is about?
Yeah, so soft as bones is a phrase that's been with me much longer than it was the title of this book. And it was when I had first started writing, but I didn't know I was writing the book yet. I was writing an essay, Soar, that's now out there in the world, and that was kind of the foundation for it. But as I was writing this, I was just like sitting one morning drinking tea and from the heavens, but I always say like from the ancestors, like I just heard this phrase in my mind, soft as bones. And it just came from nowhere. And I was like, soft as bones. And I just started thinking about it obsessively. And then I wrote a poem about it. And the longer I sat with it, like the more it became like so clear to me, like that it's just this kind of perfect metaphor for what it means to be strong and fragile at the same time and allowing both of those to coexist. Because when you think about bones, you think of them to be like really hard and rough. But, they're the things that give us structure. They allow us to stand upright. They allow me to move like this, like I am right now. But they also break very easily. But then they have this beautiful, magical ability to fuse together and heal again, which I think speaks so well to all human beings, but like specifically like Indigenous people, like the way that we have been broken or have broken, and then we fuse together and we heal and we come together, and like in that coming together, like we become, I don't know, beautifully dynamic and complex. And when thinking about, once I knew it was the book, I was like, that's what that phrase is. That's what it's supposed to be. Because within these pages, like, am I talking about trauma? Like, yes. Like, am I talking about hard things? Yes. But, I don't villainize anyone in the story, and I humanize everyone. And I capture and have tried my best to capture all of the good along with the bad. And so even though my father did this horrible thing, he was also like a wonderful father in so many other ways, and funny, and someone that I love to spend time with. And so I wanted to capture everyone in their fullness. And I guess like the Cliff Notes version of like what this book is it's very much like my reckoning with the truth and my quest for the truth, because so much of my childhood was clouded and built around lies. And so I had to kind of unravel these lies. And so you have on the base level, like, sure, the lies of my father, but then you also have like the lies of the government and everything that was covered up. Because when we were growing up and we were young, it wasn't like it is today in terms of truth and reconciliation and talking about this stuff. Like, nobody talked about that when we were kids at all. And like, thankfully I had like my grandmother and like my aunties who like were always educating us on like the true history of our family and in this country. And so this book is my way of showing how intergenerational trauma within Indigenous communities, this collective trauma that we've experienced together, is still impacting the generations of today. And really kind of showing how that trickles down, and how, even though I personally wasn't in the residential school, but my life and my childhood, I had my very real traumas and very real experiences that I had as a direct result of what happened to my grandfather during the 60s scoop, or my aunties and my uncles and my cookum who were in the schools.
So your grandparents went to residential school?
Yes. So both on my mom's side, and I think they actually, no, they escaped it on my dad's side. They were 60 scoop. My mom's side, they were residential schools.
Okay. Yeah, my dad went to Alberta residential school. And one thing I'm curious about, because I think listening to you talk and how you approach how you wanted everyone to feel like humanized in the way that you wrote about them, I feel like that's sometimes a very difficult place for people to get to. So I'm wondering, how were you able to kind of humanize your very traumatic and difficult experiences? Because it's very easy for people to be bitter or to not forgive. And I think sometimes that's what holds us back as Indigenous people. And so I'm curious for you, like, was that something that happened during the writing process? Was that something that happened like as you were growing up? Like, how were you able to take almost like a bird's dive you and like humanize the experience and the people that were a part of it?
Yeah, definitely a few things. So it's worth stating that I think my natural essence as a human being tends to be quite understanding and quite forgiving. I think I have like a very big heart in that capacity. However, I carried a lot of anger with me for a long time, you know, and that is the truth of it. And there was a few things that I did. Like, I think like number one for me was sweat lodges,
Right.
actually. And like we would do these like all women sweat up in Calling Lake and in that area with our elder Lorraine, who's still like very much close to me and my family. But I remember that first sweat lodge that we did, it was like the first time I allowed myself to like open up. And specifically, there's the round that you pray for the men. And it was the first time I ever prayed for my father and his healing, and my Uncle Jason, who took his own life, like as a result of like everything that was happening all at the same time there. And it was this big release. Like, I remember I was just like sobbing like that whole round, you know, and I won't get too much more into that. But so that was number one, was ceremony, was going there. Like you said earlier, like confronting all of the darkness in my life. I think that is an essential part of the process, like not running from it and like looking at it, naming it, and like sitting with that and allowing that to be true. And then, you know, beyond that, there was writing. And so it was kind of interesting. I was actually listening to this other podcast the other day with like Jay Shetty's podcast. Yeah, which is like so good. But he was interviewing Emma Watson. And they said this thing that I was like, yes, like this is exactly what we as artists do. But you go to therapy, of course, and that helps you, talk therapy. And I also did EMDR therapy. And then, you know, and then I have the traditional side of things as well. But when you take your experiences, your difficult experiences, the darkness in your life and your lineage, and you then create something from that, there's just a deeper release that happens. And so that's definitely what I was doing, because I was always writing alongside like grieving, processing, writing. That was like my solitude. And then I reached the point where I was like, okay, I think I'm finally ready to like tell this story, and like recognizing the importance of telling this story. But there was also a sort of like this, like, I don't know, this special moment that I had right before that I think paved the way for me to be able to tell the story, which is, so my dad was housed in a specific prison in Alberta. That's where known Skinners go. So Skinners is like a term for like pedophiles and like sexual offenders. It's a sexual offenders jail. And so when I was doing my undergrad at the University of Alberta, I was a research assistant for the University of Alberta Prison Project, which is this project where we would interview inmates and their loved ones about their experiences in prison before, and then if they were getting out, like what their rehabilitation plans were like. Right. And so there I found myself in the last year of my undergraduate degree transcribing audio recorded interviews of men in the same prison that my father was in. And so men who had committed similar crimes. And so when I was doing that and listening to their life stories, like the data that we pulled from that is 95% of those men were all physically and or sexually assaulted as their first memories in life, like all as kids. And of course you hear that and you're like, yes, okay, like that makes sense. But so I was listening to their stories, and I remember just like crying at so many of them and just like seeing my father. And I think in listening to all of their stories, that was the moment that it was the very first time I looked at my father as a human being in the world, right, and not as the monster in my life. And that was huge, right? And so it just perspective, right? It kind of like pulled me out of that anger, and I was like, then I got more curious about his life and started asking, you know, my mom about his childhood and learning those things, because everybody else in my life I gave grace, but not him. Right. And so I think that experience was definitely key for me being able to do that. And then And then you sit down, by the time I sat down to like tell the story, there was no anger. There was no anger like that left in me. It was more so like, I don't want to say no anger, but perhaps like the intensity of those feelings was like redirected more so at the collective experiences of like the schools and the scoops. And anger's not even the right word. I think it's more like grief.
Right.
Like grief, like looking at how these systems completely harmed our communities and are still doing that today. And so I think that kind of fueled my fire a little bit more to write this book, and like definitely catapulted me in the direction where I am now, you know, doing the work that I am now and really focusing on like healing and for our communities.
Sounds like you had to like go through your own healing process to get to that point to feel ready to tell your story.
Yes.
I feel like had you not gone through ceremony or had gone and collected all that data, I feel like maybe you would have been writing from a totally different perspective or angle. So it's interesting to know that your creative process was kind of in alignment with your own like healing process as a person. And yeah, I think like when you take that bird's eye view and then you recognize the systems that have like, you know, led to our own family's traumas, then you start to realize that it's interconnected and it affects us all. I'm curious what your relationship is like now with your father. Also, now that the book has come out, like how has that affected or impacted your own family?
Yeah, I think like number one is writing the book actually like allowed me to reconnect with my dad's side of the family again. Like being, I think, emotionally ready, but I just started craving those stories around the campfire again that I couldn't remember all the details of. I couldn't remember the endings and this and that. And I missed my grandfather's voice. He has like such a distinct voice, like big, thick Cree accent and like real big and laugh and jokes and just like, you know, that kind of energy. And so definitely writing the book like created that space where I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to do that. And then in terms of like my relationship with my father, so when I was 17, after he got out of prison for what he did, I went to go visit him. So I packed a bag and I came here to Vancouver, and I stayed with my auntie, Danielle, so his sister, and he picked me up this one day and we went, and it was like a rainy day, and we went to Bear Creek Park and we just sat on this big fallen tree and talked. And I asked him, like, you know, like, how could you do it? Like, how could you do this to our family? And I sit there and listened to him, and he just like cried and sobbed like the whole time. And I remember I didn't shed a tear in that moment, which was quite interesting to me. But that was the last time I saw him like in person. But now that I'm getting older and I've done all the work that I've done, there definitely is this longing in me to connect with my dad's side of the family again. And so, you know, just this morning, like my cousin Haley, she did my hair for me, right? And I hadn't seen her, and like the last time I saw her, I was 17 years old, and she was like,
really?
Yeah, I was 17 years old, and she was like 14, like something like 14, 13 years old. And so that was really special. And so, you know, sometimes me and my grandpa talk on the phone, and my dad and I will exchange like a text here and there, happy birthdays, and he knows about the book. And the last time I talked to him, he hadn't read it yet, but he said that one day he will, but that he said he's scared to read it, and he's not quite emotionally ready to take that on yet. But I hope that one day he does. And that's what my grandpa said too. He's like, it's probably going to do him some good to read that.
Yeah. And I think it makes me reflect. You brought up how like when you went to the sweat lodge ceremony, there was the round that was connected to the men, and that was like really healing for you. So it makes me just kind of reflect on like, what are the ways that we can support Indigenous men's healing so that we're not constantly telling the same stories, or that we are constantly sifting through the same data and like the same statistics. And that's what I love about storytelling though, because you are a living example of like how you can use your anger and your emotions to birth and create something new. And so, yeah, it makes me reflect on like, I wonder how reading your story would impact him and if that would help him along maybe his own healing journey and process. Because, yeah, it's like, how do we support Indigenous men?
How do we help them? Because like as women, we create, there's, like I said, like there were so many all women talking circles and healing ceremonies that I did. And I think we're starting to shift that like now, but like I think like number one is like creating spaces for them, like safe spaces to like encourage them to talk about their emotions, their experiences in life, because I think we've just failed, not even just Indigenous men, but like kind of like all men.
Yeah, true.
In that whole regard. So we definitely need more of those spaces and to foster openness. And it's been really beautiful too, like thinking about like my grandpa. And he's like an open book now.
Yeah.
You know, but he wasn't always that way.
Oh, really?
But like even like, you know, when my cousin was doing my hair and we were talking, she's like, you can ask him anything and he'll just start talking and tell you anything. And, you know, that was like when he like shared with me his story, like when him and all his siblings were taken like that day, because he was one of the older ones. So he remembers it like vividly. And he watched his baby sister get ripped from their mother's arms and, you know, put into a squad car. And to have him tell me those stories now says a lot, I think, in the direction that we're moving. And also the desire is there to share, right? So how do we continue to create spaces where we can do that? And not just like all men's or all women's, but like we should be creating more spaces doing this work together.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I would love to see that. Because like you said, there's so many women's circles, Matriarch Movement. There's so many stuff for us. I would love to see the same for our men within our communities. Storytelling is such a powerful tool for healing. I'm curious, what was your process like actually writing the book? Because you said that you felt like you got the idea and the knowing when you went through that data. Then did you just start writing, or like what was that journey like for you when you got the idea and then now to holding an actual book in our hands?
I know, which is still so crazy to me. Like sometimes
wild.
I'm like, when people come up to me, they're like, oh my God, I read your book. Like, you're amazing. I'm like, I kind of forget that it's out there in the world.
Right? I know.
And people are reading her, my beautiful baby.
And you wrote it for like 4 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like that's a whole journey.
It's a whole journey. And I actually love that it was 4 years because as you know, like 4 is one of our sacred numbers. And it's part of why I like comprise the book in like 4 parts as well, like thinking about the structure and just thinking about how the number 4 has showed up for me in my life. Like my father was sentenced for 4.5 years. And, you know, it's the 4 is the beginning of a cycle and the ending of one, right? So it's that rebirth, it's that closing of a cycle. And writing this book, I had to write this book in order to like let that fully go so I could look forward into telling all the other stories that I want to tell, which are, you know, like Indigenous love and weird magical realism and like things like that. But in terms of the actual process for writing it, I actually started with my mother's story. That's kind of how I first began. And it was the final semester of my undergraduate degree. And I enrolled in a graduate level creative writing course that was self-guided. And so I remember sitting down with my mom. And so her and I had so many conversations about her life at different times. Like all we do is we'll just sit there and talk forever. We go for walks in the river valley and unearth every thought and emotion within us. But we sat down and we had like an official interview. I said, Mom, can I like interview you and record this and transcribe this? And she was like, yeah, like let's do it. And so that was kind of how it began. And so we sat there in my cute little bachelor apartment way back in Edmonton when I was a student. And I just started asking her about her life and like, how did you meet my father? You know, like what was that process like of falling in love with a man who was in prison? And like, tell me about your childhood and like, what's your first memory as a human being on this planet? And so her story was the first one that I told because I really wanted to capture her backstory as a way of of understanding how a person can fall in love with someone who's in prison.
Right.
Because as like an outsider, you can look in and you can be like, well, that's a red flag. Why would you do that? And like judgment, you know what I mean? And so I wanted to really kind of like set the tone and pave the way for understanding how this was just a young girl who was looking for love, and that's where she found it. And so that was the beginning. And then I just kind of started writing my own memories. So what I did was I actually wrote this list, and I wrote down like the really prominent key memories in my life. So, you know, like my first sweat lodge, for example, like that was on the list, and the court date, like the moment I stood in the courtroom against my father, the acreage, like all of these like specific key moments and places in my life. And I wrote that down, and then depending on the day, I would just pick one and I would write it. And so I didn't write it in a linear way, but rather I wrote what I was emotionally capable of doing in the moment. And so if I was feeling extra tender because I wrote about more sensitive memory in my life, then I would pivot to, okay, let's write about what Christmas morning looked like in my household, and like when my dad would bake bannock and put bacon and green onions in there and jazz it up all extra fancy, which is so fire. By the I'd
be like, that doesn't sound good.
But not fry bread, bannock.
Oh, okay.
Like baked in the oven.
I only like raisins in bannock. Just kidding.
Oh my God, what the hell? That's so funny.
That's cool. So then you would like pick a memory and then write it out, and then just write it till you finished it, and then just like revise and go back.
Exactly. The revision came later. For me, the first thing I did, I'm like, I just need all these memories on paper, like type them up. And then I knew I had to capture like my sister's perspectives as well. And so I interviewed both of my sisters as well as my grandfather. And what was cool actually is like thinking about like my role as kind of like a family archivist as well.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I was doing this work for years before ever sitting down and knowing I was going to write this book. And so I actually have this interview with my Auntie Debbie, and it's so special. I don't even know why. I don't remember why I did this, but I wanted to hear about her life, and I was like, can I record this? And so we did, and she told me all about her life and her experiences. She was in the Lacombe residential school, and she told me this story about this girl in the green dress who had this like amazing spirit, and she would try to run away like every day, and then the nuns would drag her back, and she'd disappear for a while, and then there you'd see her again out in the field trying to run away again, and she never kind of gave up. And it was very interesting because she passed away. And again, this was like before I was writing the book. And so I had this interview with her voice of her story, and I shared that with the rest of my family members, including her children, like my cousins, right? And everyone was so emotional because like there's her voice again, right? And like how special is it to have something like that? And then when I was writing the book, I was getting close to the end, and I almost forgot about the girl in the green dress, and I was writing. And then it was like I could hear her voice being like, the girl in the green dress, like the girl in the green dress. Because in that moment, she told me that she always wanted to write a story about the girl in the green dress, and she passed away before she ever had the chance. So I now have the girl in the green dress, a little bit of her spirit in this book.
So it sounds like you are also able to tap into maybe your own ancestors and like connecting with the other side while you were writing and probably channeling.
Sometimes I would like go into a trance and the words would just come and like.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's cool. And I'm interested to know like so you hear a lot about creative like writer's block. So what would your advice be to like younger writers or Indigenous writers when maybe they're not sure how to share their story or they feel blocked from even using their voice?
Yeah, this I always say, like kind of the way that I did it with writing that list. So especially if you're writing like a memoir or you know, nonfiction, like something about your life, I think like just have a document or a piece of paper and think about those core memories in your life that have really shaped you and impacted you, and let those be the guide. And then just pick any memory and start. Like that's like, it's like the simplest advice, but like it's just pick a memory and start. And it doesn't, I think a lot of people get hung up on like, where do I begin?
Yeah.
Like, what's the beginning of the story? And, you know, in the beginning of my book, I literally have like a whole blurb about that. Like, where do I begin? Do I begin with me? Do I begin with my mushum? Like, how do I begin this story? Because where is the beginning, you know?
Right.
And so I think like, in terms of if you want to write it, like don't even think about the beginning of the story. Just think of a key memory and get that down and just do that again and again and again. And the more you write and the more you have, it then becomes clear to you, the structure, and you begin to weave, you begin to braid and it all makes sense. But I didn't write the beginning of my book until the end of the book.
Then you kind of saw the whole picture.
Exactly.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm also curious how you approach vulnerability, because I feel like writing your own personal memoir is so vulnerable. And I'm wondering, what was that dance between deciding what's sacred to you and to you only, and then what you want the world to see? Yeah. How did you figure out that balance?
I think it just kind of like came to me, like, and that's not the most like exciting answer, but for example, when I interviewed my family members, there was many things that like they revealed to me that had a huge, profound impact on like how I saw our childhood. And there are certain things that I just kept sacred. I'm like, this doesn't need to be in the book, because for me, a memoir is not an autobiography. Like an autobiography is like, you know, I'm freaking Barack Obama and I'm like, here's my
factual.
Life factual from the beginning to the end. And here's everything, you know? And a memoir isn't like that. A memoir is more like hyper focused on a specific theme or a key event, right? So if I think about that key event in here, that was the moment when I was 12 years old, standing in the courtroom, helping put my father in prison. And so thinking about that when I was writing it, like I knew that the main question and theme in my mind was, how does what happened then, how has that impacted me today?
Right.
And me and my family, I viewed as just a microcosm making kind of like one piece of the mosaic, right? The one little piece of that puzzle. And so when I was telling the story, I'm like, this isn't a family history for my family members or for the world. This is me telling this very specific aspect of my life and relating that to the larger cultural things that happen to us, essentially. And so I just kind of like kept that in mind. And then as I was doing it, like I said, I think you just kind of know what you keep sacred to you. And even like when I wrote about like my experiences in the sweat lodge, I only wrote about that once, but I was very poetic with it.
Right.
Like, and so in moments when I wanted to keep things closer to me or that felt sacred, I would actually switch over to poetry and kind of use images and metaphors instead as a way of telling that.
That makes sense. I'm also curious about your process or the way you decide how much context to tell about our history as Indigenous people, because I feel like this is what happens to us often as hosts or authors or writers, is sometimes we're like, okay, how much context do I need to provide of like the 60 Scoop, of residential schools, of the Indian Act? And so how did you find that balance? And like also what would maybe your advice be to Indigenous authors that are still trying to find that balance within the work that they're currently doing?
Yeah, so I think like in regards to that, I think like my style is as a writer is I like to just set the scene, tell the memory and paint the images and then let the reader kind of sit with that and digest it. Like I know that my reader is smart. I know that they know how to build connections. And so that's kind of like the way that I write. However, that being said, you have to give like a little bit of context. And so what I kind of did was so in the first 3 parts, it's very much rooted in my experiences and my family's experiences. Like the true, like familial what happened. And in the fourth part, that's when I kind of bring in some of the larger ideas of like missing and murdered Indigenous women and a little bit about the 60s scoop and this is what the movement is and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to ground the reader in just like the family unit and like the family structure. And that doesn't mean that I'm tacking on something to the end.
Right.
But rather, I was rooting us in our culture. And, you know, that was very much present and is present through the beginning part of the book. So you have the culture, but then you're witnessing a family breakdown. And maybe you know why, maybe you don't know why. And then when you get to the fourth part, I kind of envision that part as like the closing of the braid, bringing everything, all of the other strands that I have woven together in the first three parts and bringing them together with just enough context. And I do that by telling my grandfather's story at the end and the story of when him and his siblings were taken. And so I told those histories through my family members. Through my family members' stories and through their voices.
Yeah, thanks. It makes me think of the responsibility that we have as Indigenous writers and storytellers, because I imagine being a non-Indigenous author or storyteller, you don't have to think of like your community, the history, being accountable to what information you're putting out there, which is also kind of the beauty about being Indigenous, though, is that we're accountable to a community. I'm curious, why do you think and how is Indigenous storytelling different than like mainstream storytelling? That would be the first question. And also why and how does Indigenous storytelling have the power to heal? In like what way?
Yeah. So I think like how it's different is we view everything as like a collective.
Right.
And everything is interconnected. Like, at no point am I like my story. Right. In fact, like it's always like our story. Right. And when I'm saying our, I'm talking about the family, but I'm also talking about the community, like at the same time. And so like everything is relational, right? And so I think because we are relational people, I think that comes through in our storytelling. And also too, thinking about like how we talked about like me hearing, you know, channeling the ancestors and things like that. Like because we are so connected to our ancestors, to the land, you know, that is woven through every fiber of us. And so when we sit down to write, like, and to tell stories, whether that's orally or written, you know, you're hearing those lineages within the stories. And I think that can be very different from non-Indigenous writers and everything like that. But, and then thinking too about like how Indigenous storytelling is healing is, number one, like oral stories have always been our way of communicating and instilling lessons and also connection and having different stories for different times of the year and stories being correlated with seasons and everything like that. And now in today's society with like where we are as Indigenous peoples is all those stories were taken away from us. You know, and there was silence and erasure and forbidden languages and forbidden cultural practices, ceremonies, everything, you name it. And so now today our storytellers are giving us our voices back. And so me, you know, not having been in the schools, I'm telling some of those stories, but they're my family's stories, you know? And so thinking about my aunties and my uncles who were in the schools and couldn't speak their languages anymore, you know, now I get to help do that and help tell those stories and bridge that gap, that separation that colonialism really tried to force upon us.
Yeah, and I think through storytelling, you reclaim that connection to like your spirit and your identity and who you are as an Indigenous person. And I find like Indigenous storytelling is, yes, connected to our culture and who we are, but also the land and like where we come from.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I get so excited about our stories. And it also makes me curious how to like continue telling our stories, because I know some of the work that I do and with women, sometimes we'll have like a lot of sharing circles, and some things I've noticed is we can be really blocked in like our throat, and so even just sharing in a sharing circle can be like so much for our people and for ourselves. And I'm curious if you went through that yourself, or like if someone is still like, I have a story to share, but I don't have the confidence, or I don't know who's even going to listen. Like what, I guess, like, was there moments in your healing journey that helped you like dismantle maybe the blockage within your own voice?
Yeah. Number one actually is bad therapists.
Oh, yeah.
Because I would have to retell my story to different over and over, trying to find someone that could work with me and help me. But just like what you said, I think back to this drum making ceremony I did when I was like 14, and we were doing circle, and everyone was going around and talking. And I couldn't yet say like what I was struggling with. And so instead I just, gave thanks for being there and passed it on. But I remember the courage of some of those women. And at the end of the drum making ceremony, we all went up to the fire and screamed, right? And I'll never forget this one woman's scream where it was just like, because she spoke quieter during circle, but her scream was the loudest thing, like, and very powerful. And I think that, is exactly what you're talking about here. But I think just telling it, and maybe what that looks like is just saying it to your closest friend to start, like true. Someone that you trust. It doesn't always have to be to the world, but two, I think for me, writing it was key, because especially as someone who was forced to keep secrets like my whole childhood, writing, it's just you in the page. Yeah. And it's a much less scary thing. And you do that, and you do it over and again. You get more comfortable with your story, and you get more comfortable with sharing that and analyzing that. And then I think having those conversations with your loved ones and with whoever your human beings are, I think goes a long way with helping you unlock that. And then eventually you reach the point where, like, there I was, first year freaking MFA, and I was reading my words out loud for the first time in front of a room full of strangers, sobbing the whole time. Sobbing the whole time. But that's part of it, is like moving through the discomfort as well.
It reminds me of being an actor. So there was this one exercise where you had to write a letter to someone you loved, and then you had to write a letter to someone you hate or like have a disagreement with. And they would make you perform it in front of like the whole class. Wow. And you were like given a group of 4 people. So you had like a team of 4. And so basically you would just get up and you would read that letter, and then the team of 4 would be like supporting you and clapping and like telling you to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so like you're saying this, but it's so connected to who you are that you like go through the motions. And so what you find out usually is like that letter to someone you like disliked or had hatred towards, you find out at the end like, oh, I felt this way because I actually love you so much. And that's why I actually feel this way. Or, I love you, yes, but you still like disappointed me. You just like see the cycles of emotions. So writing and your process makes me also think of like actors and the process, but also how that exercise allowed me to release and like release all those emotions.
It's true.
And it makes me think of how like those spaces are so important to have.
It's interesting too, because I always say this, that anger is just the protective emotion that covers up hurt, and hurt can only really be there when love is underneath.
Exactly.
And then, if I think about like, I don't know, even like this book, right? And like soft as bones and gentleness and fragility. It's just like, yeah, it's all a way of just kind of like unpacking that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and now you've gone through that process. So how are you feeling now that your book is out in the world? And how has it been received too? Like I've only heard good things and it's a national bestseller. So obviously it's doing well.
I have felt so incredibly blessed and grateful with the reception, especially from community, because that's like why I wrote it. Like that's like the heart of it. And so to be, whether I'm like modeling at a show or being wherever in the world I am in community doing something, and to have people come up to me from, you know, communities, whether they're, you know, freaking Mohawk from out east or like whether they're from Alberta, then they tell me like, wow, like your book was amazing and my story was so similar and this and that. And I want to write my own book and, you know, like hearing all of them. So even if only like 10 people read it and like that's what they were saying, then that's how I knew that I did the right thing. And so I hope that this book just continues to do that and continues to meet people on their healing journey wherever in the world that they are. But yeah, I think I've come a long way from being like the young girl who used to only tell her secrets in her notebook to now gifting everything to the world. So even if you can't find your voice quite yet, like you will find it. And even if that means you don't have to share the hardest thing right away, sometimes it's just your name and your favorite color.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the beginning.
It's like when the elders say, like, when you're learning your language, to learn like your name, your spirit name, but also to just learn how to pray and then just pray to yourself. And that's like the first part, which is what I remind myself. I still need to learn how to pray in Cree though.
Girl, same. That's like my next sort of like mission is like just really connecting with like our language.
Exactly. Because I feel like that, like I'm learning a little bit of Cree right now and just like my goal, I think in this lifetime is to start thinking in a nehiao, like a Cree way. When you start like shifting your consciousness through like how our people thought, like that's goals.
Yes.
But it's also so, it's a big goal.
It's a big goal, but worthwhile.
But speaking of goals, I know like Soft as Bones is a pillar and now you have a foundation. What are you hoping to create through your foundation? And could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so Soft as Bones Storytelling Foundation, I'm hoping to create those spaces, right?
Yeah.
Create a all Indigenous storytelling festival, which we actually don't have yet. And so when I was thinking about like a literary festival, I was like, but for us Indigenous people, it's not just words, that's storytelling, it's jewelry, it's fashion, it's dance, you know, it's all of those things. And so that's kind of how I had this like vision. And so now I'm just like generating funds for it, but 2026 is the goal to have like the first one and have panels by writers, have dances, have like a market and just kind of like create this space for us to do that. And then also eventually pair some retreats with it as well to host at different times in the year. We want to do like one youth retreat as well as like one for adults where they can come and they can learn how to write or they can learn how to bead and they can learn how to paint from Indigenous creatives out there.
I would have loved that as a kid.
Yeah, me too.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm surprised that hasn't happened yet. But
I know.
I mean, you have to be the person to pave the way.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the mission is I'm just like what I did for myself through my art, I just want to help everybody else do that as well.
And where can people support everything that you're up to currently? Also, what are you up to currently? Now that the book is out in the world, I know you got a job at Inspire as a content creator and you're doing all these other things, modeling and different shows. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, so now I work for Inspire as their storyteller and content writer. So I make content for them, but I also write like speeches and just, you know, a lot of script writing. I am currently finishing writing a short film that I hope to get made and produced because the end goal is visual storytelling. I love visual storytelling. And so I'm really cultivating that. And me being me, I'm also writing my novel right now that
A
novel. I'm writing a novel that I wrote this TV pilot when I was a student at Columbia. And so now I'm adapting that TV pilot into a novel first, actually, which is like backwards. Normally they do it the other way around. Yeah. But I was like, you know what? No, let me write the book for this first and like do all the world building. And and everything like that. And then I mostly do like modeling for like Indigenous designers, just being a vessel for their storytelling. I find very empowering, and I like being a part of other people's stories in that way. And where am I? I'm here, there, and everywhere. But you can find me on Instagram at Soft as Bones. That's like my main platform. But your girl's dabbling in TikTok these days as well. So yeah, hit me up.
And you got a YouTube too.
And I got a YouTube. Yeah,
that came up when I googled you today. It was like you're vlogging,
vlogging all the events I go to and all the fun, great things that we get up to in this beautiful life.
And what other Indigenous authors should people be reading currently?
Oh my God. There's so freaking many.
There's a lot.
There's so many.
I'm curious what you're reading.
Yeah. So Chyana Marie Mayote's Heartberries is like my favorite memoir of all time. So she's a big one. In terms of like poetry, like I love Kinsale Drake's poetry, the way that she, brings in ancestral memory, like with, current present day things and love and all of those. So she's a great one. I'm trying to think of oh my God, right now I'm reading We Survived the Night by Julian Brave Noisecat. It's brand new memoir. It literally, I think I got like a pre-release copy, but I think it's out like as of October 14th. Okay. So I'm blown away. So I'm in like the middle of reading it, but talk about like braiding and weaving together like stories and histories and reportage and all that stuff. It's very, very cool. But yeah, like the list goes on. Like
there's a lot, but very cool. It's a cool time.
Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. Love that book.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Bad Cree, Jessica Johns.
I have so many books at home, honestly.
It's spooky season right now, so I'm like, everyone read Bad Cree if you haven't read it. Like it's so freaking good.
I haven't read it yet.
Anything by Eden Robinson.
Yeah, true.
Chef's
Trickster, son of a trickster.
Yeah. Her OG Monkey Beach. God, I love that book. Yeah.
Last question. We're on the Matriarch Movement Podcast. I'm curious, how would you define matriarch?
Oh my God, how do we define matriarch?
I know, it's the last question. It's the most difficult one.
Matriarch is honoring and embodying lineages. That's how I would define it, because when I think of matriarchs, I think of my grandmother, but I also think of my mother, but I also think of like my cookum, and I think of like my great grandmother, and I think of all the ways that our stories are connected, and how the strength of my great cookum is still protecting me and with me today. And so it's that connection, and even like thinking about my role now as like an auntie, right? And building that connection with like the little ones. So it comes from the past, but it also is how we move in the world that's going to impact tomorrow as well.
Exactly. Sweet. Well, you're impacting me right now. Just kidding.
Likewise.
Well, thank you so much, Chyana, for being here and for sharing your story and your book, and honestly, a lot of your own personal journey. I can't wait to host the event with you tonight.
We're gonna have so much fun. I'm like, damn. I forgot we have a whole other thing.
I know
to
we
do.
have another thing tonight. But make sure you check out her book, Soft as Bones. Also follow her on TikTok, her YouTube, her Instagram, and also her foundation. I'll be sure to include those in the show notes below. So thank you so much for being here.
If you're not on social media, just send me a smoke signal. I'll find it.